The Stone in the River. At the edge of a tranquil river, where the water shimmered beneath the sun and tall reeds swayed in the breeze, stood a small, ancient temple. Here lived Ryokan, a Zen master known not for grand teachings or complex philosophies, but for his quiet presence and simple wisdom. The temple, hidden deep within the forest, was a place of refuge for those who sought peace, guidance, or simply a moment of stillness in the midst of their busy lives. One morning, a man named Kenji arrived at the temple. He was older than most visitors, his face etched with lines of worry and regret. Kenji had lived a full life, building a successful business, raising a family, and earning the respect of those around him. But now, in his later years, he found himself consumed by bitterness and dissatisfaction. His wealth no longer brought him joy, and he felt distant from his family. Worse, he could not shake the sense that his life, despite all his achievements, was somehow incomplete. Kenji had heard of Ryokan's wisdom from a friend, and so, in his desperation, he made the long journey to the temple. When he arrived, Ryokan was sitting by the river, watching the water flow gently over the rocks. The master looked up, smiled warmly, and gestured for Kenji to sit beside him. "I am lost, master," Kenji began, his voice trembling with emotion. "I have worked hard my whole life, achieved everything I set out to do, and yet, I feel empty. I do not understand why. I thought that success would bring happiness, but it hasn't. I feel like I have wasted my life chasing things that don't matter. What should I do?" Ryokan, as was his way, said nothing at first. He simply gazed at the river, watching the current move around the stones. After a long silence, he picked up a small pebble from the riverbank and handed it to Kenji. "Hold this," Ryokan said softly. Kenji took the pebble, feeling its smooth surface in his hand, and waited for the master to speak again. But Ryokan remained quiet, his attention once more on the flowing water. As the silence stretched on, Kenji began to feel uneasy. Was this Ryokan's answer? A simple pebble? Frustration bubbled up inside him, but he did not want to disrespect the master. So he held the stone and watched the river as Ryokan did, though his mind raced with questions. After what felt like hours, Ryokan finally spoke. "The stone in your hand, what do you notice about it?" Kenji looked down at the pebble. "It's smooth," he replied, unsure of what else to say. Ryokan nodded. "Yes, and do you know why it is smooth?" Kenji thought for a moment. "I suppose it's because of the water. The river has worn it down over time." "Exactly," Ryokan said. "The stone became smooth not through its own effort, but by surrendering to the river's flow. It did not resist the current, but allowed the water to shape it little by little over many years." Kenji looked at the stone again, realizing the depth of Ryokan's words. The master continued, "You, Kenji, have spent your life resisting the current. You worked hard, yes, but always pushing against the flow, trying to control everything around you, thinking that success meant mastering the river. But true peace, true fulfillment, comes not from control, but from letting go." The word struck Kenji like a revelation. He had never considered that his relentless pursuit of success was the very thing that had caused his discontent. He had spent his life trying to shape the world to his will, only to find that the world could not be controlled. The harder he pushed, the more distant happiness seemed. Ryokan stood up and gestured for Kenji to follow him. They walked along the riverbank until they came to a spot where the water was calm, its surface reflecting the sky like a mirror. The master bent down and picked up another stone, this one rough and jagged. "This stone has just begun its journey in the river," Ryokan said, holding it up for Kenji to see. "It is sharp, full of edges, much like you were when you first began your life's work. But with time, the river will smooth it, just as it has smoothed the pebble in your hand." Kenji understood. His life had been full of sharp edges, ambition, desire, fear of failure, and those edges had caused him pain. But now, as he stood by the river with Ryokan, he realized that it wasn't too late to change. He could allow the flow of life to shape him, just as the river shaped the stones. He could let go of the need to control, and in doing so, find the peace he had been searching for. For the next few days, Kenji stayed at the temple, spending time with Ryokan and learning not through formal lessons, but through simple acts. Walking by the river, listening to the wind in the trees, watching the sun set over the forest. Slowly, he began to feel a sense of calm he hadn't known in years. The bitterness and regret that had once filled his heart started to fade, replaced by a quiet acceptance of life as it was. On the morning of his departure, Kenji stood by the river one last time. He held the smooth pebble in his hand, feeling its weight, and smiled. He had come to the temple seeking answers, and while Ryokan had not given him any in the way he expected, he had found something far more valuable: the ability to let go. Before leaving, Kenji turned to Ryokan and bowed deeply. "Thank you, Master," he said. "I understand now. The river flows, and I must flow with it." Ryokan smiled, his eyes twinkling with the wisdom of ages. "The river flows, Kenji, and so do you." As Kenji walked away from the temple, the weight he had carried for so many years lifted from his shoulders. He knew that the path ahead would not always be easy, but he no longer felt the need to control it. Like the stone in the river, he would allow life to shape him, trusting that, in time, he too would be smoothed by the gentle current of existence. Conclusion: letting go and flowing with life. The story of Kenji and the stone in the river teaches us a powerful lesson about the nature of life. Many of us, like Kenji, spend our lives trying to control everything, believing that success comes from mastering our circumstances. But true peace and fulfillment come not from control, but from learning to let go and flow with the currents of life. Just as the river smooths the stones over time, life shapes us through our experiences. By resisting the flow, we create tension and unhappiness. But when we surrender to the natural rhythms of life, we allow ourselves to grow, to change, and to find the peace that comes from within. The stone in the river reminds us that we don't have to have all the answers. We simply need to trust the process, let go of the need to control, and allow life to shape us in its own time. In doing so, we can find the calm, contentment, and inner strength that we have been seeking all along.